He didn't break the law. He just put sunshade film on his bedroom window. But Walter Jenkins, the new HOA chair of Oak Haven Estates, sent a drone crashing through his home to issue a fine. Without warning, without consent, without limits. David Chun didn't stay silent. He caught the drone, marched into the HOA office and slammed it down in front of the man behind it all. But just wait until you hear how the standoff exploded, and why, in the end, justice came crashing back just as hard. David Chun had never thought much about homeowners associations. Back in the city, they didn't exist, or at least not in a way that touched daily life. Oak Haven Estates, with its manicured lawns and postcard homes, had seemed like a quiet slice of control in an otherwise chaotic world. That was exactly what he'd wanted. A fresh start. That Tuesday morning started like the others. Peaceful. Familiar. The sun rose slowly over the rooftops, casting pale light across the neighborhood. David padded barefoot into the kitchen, still wrapped in the soft fog of sleep. He liked these early hours. No meetings, no notifications, no obligations, just silence, coffee, and a view of the street from the window above his sink. Steam curled up from his mug as he sipped. The taste was rich, comforting. A breeze rustled the trees outside. Somewhere nearby, sprinklers clicked to life, spinning arcs of water over someone's perfect lawn. Even the birds seemed to move in slow motion. And then, without warning, the window in his bedroom shattered. The sound was instant and overwhelming. Glass burst inward with a force that sent jagged pieces flying across the hardwood. The curtains snapped upward. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. David dropped his mug, the ceramic cracking against the floor, a small noise swallowed by the ringing in his ears. He turned the corner in shock, eyes wide, and stopped. In the center of the chaos, hanging in midair, was a drone, black, sleek, angular. Its rotors buzzed with clinical precision as it hovered silently, deliberately, just feet from where he stood. For a moment, David genuinely thought he was dreaming. It didn't feel real. And then it spoke. Violation detected. Unauthorized tinting of street-facing windows. The voice was flat and synthetic, processed through a speaker beneath the body of the drone. It wasn't loud, but it was final, like a sentence being read out in a courtroom. David stared at it, mouth slightly open. He wasn't sure what stunned him more, the violation itself or the method of delivery. This wasn't a letter. This wasn't an email. It was a machine sent directly into his home, issuing penalties as if it had the right. The drone rotated slightly, as if scanning the room. David instinctively took a step back. Was this really happening? Was this legal? Was someone watching him right now? After a few seconds that felt like minutes, the drone rose higher, angled itself toward the broken window, and just as suddenly as it had arrived, zipped back outside, vanishing into the sky with a high-pitched whine of departing horror. And David stood there alone, barefoot, surrounded by glass. A breeze moved through the gash in the window frame, carrying with it a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The rules had changed, and something told him this was only the beginning. David spent the first few hours after the incident pacing his living room, replaying the drone's voice in his head. The message wasn't just unsettling. It was precise. It sounded rehearsed, programmed, too specific to be random. He grabbed his phone and opened his email. Maybe the HOA had already followed up. And there it was. Subject: Code Violation. Residential Exterior Compliance Level 2. Attached was a PDF. Violation: Unauthorized tinting on front-facing bedroom window. Fine: $280 due within 10 business days. Captured via autonomous HOA unit. RRN 22. David blinked at the screen. Autonomous unit. There wasn't even a mention of human inspection. No warning, no note under the door, just a mechanical flyby and a fine. He clicked on a link labeled Evidence Capture. It led to a short video footage from the drone's camera, time-stamped and overlaid with legalese. It showed the window, the reflective film glinting under sunlight, then zoomed in and marked it in red with the words, NON compliant. David leaned back in his chair. This wasn't a mistake. It was policy. That afternoon, he walked the block and spoke with a few neighbors. He didn't have to bring up the drone. They did it first. An older man, Arthur, from 2 doors down, said one buzzed near his porch last week and flagged him for improper fence alignment. He received a $120 fine and was told to hire an HOA-approved contractor to realign it. A younger couple, Ben and Sarah, had been cited for having a garden gnome that interrupted visual harmony. David raised an eyebrow. What does that even mean? No one knows, Sarah said with a tired laugh. They make up the language to make you feel like you broke a law. Another resident whispered that someone had been warned for hanging a wind chime that was audibly disruptive. The list went on. Flower pots that weren't HOA-certified colors, lawn chairs left out past sunset, tree branches that extended beyond invisible boundary lines. At the center of it all was a name that came up over and over: Walter Jenkins. Walter had been elected HOA chairman less than 6 months ago. A former corporate compliance officer, he was known for his meticulous nature and passion for regulation. Under his leadership, the HOA charter had been revised, a term neighbors used reluctantly, to include ambiguous language about digital surveillance, autonomous enforcement, and non-invasive aerial inspections. The revisions had passed quietly. The vote was held during a midday Zoom session when most residents were at work. Those who questioned it were dismissed as uninformed. And now the consequences were flying through the sky. David returned home that evening with a pit in his stomach. The Oakhaven Estates HOA hadn't just updated its rules. It had transformed into something else entirely. Something that watched without asking, penalized without warning. The HOA wasn't protecting the neighborhood anymore. It was policing it. And for the first time, David realized he wasn't just living under rules, he was living under surveillance. Walter Jenkins's name came up everywhere, whispered on sidewalks, mentioned at mailbox clusters, avoided in open conversation. To some, he was just the new HOA chair. To others, he was the reason Oakhaven no longer felt like home. David wanted to understand him, not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. You don't challenge something you don't fully see. So he started digging. Walter Jenkins had once been a corporate attorney in a firm that specialized in compliance law, the kind of job that required precision, absolute adherence to protocols, and a tolerance for long hours spent buried in documents others barely read. Colleagues from his past, according to a few online mentions, described him as methodical, intense, and difficult to argue with. After retiring early, he moved into Oakhaven Estates and, within months, ran for a seat on the HOA board. No one ran against him. No one thought it mattered, but it did. Once elected, Walter began to quietly reshape the foundation of the HOA. The changes weren't dramatic at first. A bylaw rephrased here, a new term inserted there. Suggested guidelines became mandatory standards. Inspections went from seasonal walkthroughs to real-time monitoring. Then came the drones. David found an archived HOA meeting from 5 months ago. It was buried deep in the resident portal, unlisted, unlabeled, nearly impossible to find without knowing where to look. In the recording, Walter laid out a vision for what he called smart governance. His voice was calm, steady, almost soothing. He used words like optimization, efficiency, and zero-lag enforcement. But what stood out most was the phrase he repeated: order breeds excellence. He said it as if it were a law of nature, a truth beyond question. David paused the video and stared at the frozen frame. Walter sitting in a tidy office, shelves behind him lined with legal binders and thick policy manuals. No art, no family photos, just structure. There was no trace of empathy in his voice, no allowance for individuality in his proposals. Everything pointed to one goal: control. And drones, it turned out, were the perfect tools for a man who valued surveillance over conversation. Neighbors knew. They talked quietly. Many resented him. Some feared him. Others simply gave up. One woman had been fined 3 times in a week for lawn edge violations. A single mother said she replaced her mailbox 4 times to meet unspecified design harmony requirements. A teenager had received a warning for sitting on the roof of his garage. Visible disruption. the letter said. But no one formally challenged Walter. Every protest was met with more rules. Every question answered with citations and legal terminology that most residents didn't understand. His grip tightened not through force, but through paperwork, through silence. David, however, wasn't feeling fear. Not anymore. He was feeling something sharper, something heavier. Resolve. The more he learned about Walter Jenkins, the clearer it became. This wasn't about property values. This wasn't about safety. It was about power, one man's obsession with order projected across an entire neighborhood. And David was no longer willing to live beneath it. It was nearly midnight when David stepped outside. The neighborhood was silent, unnaturally so. No crickets, no wind, just the occasional flicker of porch lights and the low, constant hum of distant electronics. Oakhaven Estates didn't sleep anymore. It monitored. David walked the sidewalk slowly, hands in his jacket pockets, listening, watching, processing. The place that once looked like the perfect suburb now felt tight, as if the air itself had rules. The trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes, spotless driveways. All of it now seemed less like harmony and more like submission. Halfway down Maplewood Lane, he saw her. Eleanor Thompson, a widow in her 70s who'd lived there longer than most. She was sitting on her porch steps, head bowed, a white envelope clutched in her hand. David approached gently. "Everything okay, ma'am?" She looked up. Her eyes were red. She tried to smile but couldn't quite hold it. "They fined me," she said. "Said my bushes weren't aesthetically expressive enough." David knelt beside her. She handed him the notice. It was real. Violation. Excessive foliage. Lack of expressive aesthetic. Fine. $150. Photos taken from an elevated angle. DRRN 17. "I trimmed them last week," she whispered. "I swear I did." She wasn't angry. She wasn't defiant. She was defeated, the way someone looks when they realize the fight isn't fair, when the rules keep changing and there's no one left to ask for help. 2 blocks later, David saw another sign. A man named Kevin was repainting his garage in the dark. A floodlight precariously propped on a ladder, arms streaked with 2 shades of gray. His original paint had been deemed non-compliant. The HOA's swatch guide listed acceptable tones. His was apparently 6% too warm. When David asked how long he'd had to fix it, Kevin sighed. "They gave me 48 hours. Said if I didn't, it'd be a second-tier aesthetic violation with a higher fine." He didn't even look angry anymore, just exhausted. And overhead, buzzing faintly like a persistent whisper, a drone glided silently between rooftops, a red light blinking every few seconds. They weren't hiding it. They didn't have to. The drones had become more than tools. They were symbols. Symbols of presence, of dominance. Black-winged enforcers that hovered, observed, and judged. They didn't knock. They didn't ask. They just arrived, recorded, and left behind fines like digital feathers. The worst part, David discovered, was that the HOA wasn't even flying them anymore. The entire operation had been outsourced to a private surveillance contractor called SkySight Solutions. No neighborhood vote, no consent, no warning. The contract allowed SkySight's drones to operate autonomously and continuously over Oakhaven Estates, using AI to identify code violations in real time. And because the drones weren't operated by law enforcement, privacy laws didn't apply in the same way. The loophole was massive. Walter Jenkins had found it, walked through it, and closed the door behind him. David's hands tightened in his pockets. This wasn't just about lawn edges or paint. It wasn't about preserving property value or visual consistency. This was about control, and about how far a system could reach before someone said, "Enough." What he felt that night wasn't just frustration. It wasn't even fear anymore. It was hatred, not the loud, chaotic kind, but a steady, quiet heat, focused, sharp, growing stronger by the hour. David looked up once more at the blinking red eye drifting across the sky. They were watching, but so was he. David didn't sleep much that night. He sat at his desk long after midnight, re-watching the drone footage, flipping through HOA documents, rereading the violation emails as if searching for a weak point. Something missed, something human in an inhuman system. But there wasn't one, so he decided to stop waiting. At 8:43 the next morning, David climbed a narrow ladder to the roof of his garage. He wore thick utility gloves and carried a long-handled net, one used for pool cleaning, reinforced with duct tape along the rim. It wasn't perfect. It didn't have to be. He just needed one shot. He lay flat behind the slope of the roof, the net beside him, the early morning sun pressing against the back of his neck. His heart beat slow, steady, not from fear, but from focus. He had learned the drone's pattern the past few days. It always scanned the same path. It always passed his hedges at the same time. 9:05 a.m. Right on schedule, he heard it. A soft hum, subtle, mechanical, unmistakable. David rose to his knees slowly, peering over the ridge. There it was. The drone glided into view from the north end of the street, perfectly aligned over the treetops. It drifted in the air as if it were weightless, eyes forward, sensors calculating. Then it dropped altitude. Just above David's front hedges, it paused, stabilized. A slight tilt of the rotors indicated it was beginning a scan. That was the moment. David moved fast. In a single fluid motion, he stepped up from the roofline and swung the net wide. A fast arc through the air that cut against the whirring blades and snapped shut like a cage. The drone reacted instantly. It twisted, fought, shrieked. The high-pitched whine of rotors grinding against nylon and carbon poles. It jerked left, trying to lift, but the fabric tangled its rotors mid-spin. David gripped the handle tighter, his knuckles whitening, the net bucking in his arms as if it were alive. He felt the tension in every muscle. Not just the physical strain, but something deeper. The release of weeks of pressure, fear, surveillance. His chest burned. His breath came in hard bursts. Then it stopped. The rotors powered down. The drone went still. David crouched, still gripping the frame, not trusting the silence. After a second of hesitation, he reached inside, found the primary battery module, and with a twist and pull, disconnected it. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, but clean. He stood there on his own rooftop, holding the machine like a downed wasp. Wings tangled, light gone, no buzzing, no voice, just the hum of morning traffic in the distance and the wind brushing past the trees. It wasn't just a drone anymore. It was evidence, it was proof, it was his line in the sand. David stared at the lifeless machine in his hands and felt something shift inside. No more notes, no more whispers. It was time to show them what they had created, and he would begin by returning their little machine personally. David didn't call ahead. He didn't draft a complaint or file a grievance form. He'd had enough of emails, forms, and quiet obedience. That morning, he zipped up a weathered duffel bag and placed the lifeless drone inside, wrapped in the same net that had brought it down. He tucked on a clean jacket, locked his front door, and walked straight down the main road toward the HOA office. It was 11:47 a.m., peak hours. Cars filled the lot. Residents cycled in and out for parking permits, landscaping approvals, and quiet conversations about citations they didn't fully understand. David stepped through the front glass doors and into the heart of the system. Inside, the air was crisp, overconditioned, sterile. The front desk receptionist glanced up, smiled automatically until she saw what was under his arm. David said nothing. He didn't need to. Every step toward the back hallway felt like walking deeper into something cold and artificial. He passed polished photos of Oakhaven's first construction phase, HOA committee portraits, and plaques for Neighborhood of the Year awards, all symbols of control dressed as order. At the end of the hall, behind a pane of frosted glass, sat the man himself, Walter Jenkins. He was hunched slightly over a keyboard, fingers moving with mechanical precision. Neatly combed hair, black-rimmed glasses, not a paper out of place on his desk. The man ran this place like a courtroom, and he never expected the defendant to walk in without an invitation. David opened the door without knocking. Walter looked up. His face shifted from surprise to calculated neutrality, a flicker of tension behind the eyes. David stepped inside, placed the duffel bag gently on the carpet, unzipped it without a word, and reached in. The broken drone emerged slowly, like a trophy pulled from wreckage. One rotor bent, one lens cracked. He held it overhead for a heartbeat of silence, then slammed it down onto the plexiglass desk. Crack. The surface splintered beneath the weight and force, webbing outward from the point of impact. The receptionist down the hall gasped. Walter froze, his mouth opened slightly, but no sound came. David leaned forward, voice low, not threatening, not loud, just firm. "You sent this through my window." A pause. The sound of the drone's body settling on broken plastic. Asterisk asterisk, next one flies in, it's not.